But what you presented now is kind of the opposite. It seems like you guys already preparing for coalition. So I want to know what has changed since the policy conference. You know, have you guys done additional polling maybe that's indicated that you might have to prepare for not being the majority party anymore? And then the last question is around racism. You spoke about how there should be more stringent steps against those who commit, you know, any racist acts. Were there any discussions around what exactly could be done? Maybe more jail time, fines, that kind of thing. Were there any examples brought forward?
Okay, Natasha.
Natasha Korea. So just to pick up on the whole issue of racism, I mean, you spoke out against racism a lot, but I think to a person who's political high, who says the ANC is busy talking about racism, but it's a party that does not reflect, you know, of equal representation in society. How do you plan on then tackling that issue? Another interesting thing that I saw is your strategy convention, where all you wanted to bring progressive society together to talk about issues going forward as the ANC, but also just please give us time frames as to when you plan to actually have those. You said this year, but when will those conventions actually take place? Thank you.
Okay. Comrade Makura.
Thank you very much. Can I start with the last? Okay. And those of you who know, that's how I respond to questions. So if you want me to answer your question, be the last to speak. But I'll answer all the questions, certainly. Natasha, firstly, just on the issue, was there a detailed discussion on what we call the strengthening, sharpening the instruments to deal with racism in our society? At the level of strategy and tactics, because the strategy and tactics is you set the framework. All policies of the ANC are shaped and must derive from our strategic posture. What do we stand for? What can we, what do we seek to achieve? What are our values? What is our vision? What is it we can tolerate? Yes, differences in society, but there are things that we say that in a democracy this shouldn't be the case. So the strategy and tactics, as you would know, so we discuss. We can't tolerate racism. So we didn't discuss specific instruments like legislation. What legislation? We said at the level of the state, we need to sharpen our instruments. The South African government and state needs to be following through on our constitution, living the dream. We need to be a place where racism is not tolerated. So there will be work that needs to be done in government about that level of detail. I know that dealing with racism and gender-based violence, there may also be specific proposals in some of the commissions about what things need to be done. And in the ANC, you can have a lot of debate on a specific proposal. But once it is adopted by conference, and I saw some, I can't tell you what they are because they may be rejected by conference. They may be adopted. I think we should wait to see what conference has said. How do you deal with gender-based violence? How do you deal with racism? So we left it at the level of our posture and our political assessment of where things are heading in our country. We are heading to a very dangerous place where black people, and we say it's not acceptable, we can't accept it. As long as the ANC is in charge, we have to sharpen our response to that. Non-racialism, you raise an important issue, but does the ANC reflect in its composition? We had a very heated debate sponsored by the Western Cape delegation. The delegates from the Western Cape were basically saying that the ANC has always discussed what's called the national question. So what's the national question? And that's why when we talk about oppression Historically, we have talked about the oppressed. We said the Africans in particular and blacks in general, in the way I have defined it earlier on, and that liberation and the full meaning of it must find application, and the character of the ANC must find application in that. So we are very critical of ourselves, basically, across the country, where we have the ANC in communities, and that doesn't reflect the character of the South Africa we want. Those are organizational shortcomings, but they don't change our vision. They don't change the fact that we want a truly non-racial society, a truly non-racial economy, in that sense. So yes, we have weaknesses in terms of reflecting what we stand for, what our vision is on non-racialism. Time frames on that, the series of strategy sessions. In the earlier draft, we had a time frame as the drafters coming from the commissions. We had a time frame, but we were wisely advised by conference that don't put the time frame in there. It is something that must go to the NEC, but it is something that is pretty important this year. So we had a time frame that was reflecting the agency. It's something very, very important about gathering these forces to help reflect that. So that's really the thing. Quinnen, coalitions, they again, we have made a mistake before of allowing our region, our municipalities, our regions, the ANC structures lower down there in the provinces to discuss coalitions and just enter into coalitions not based on any particular political strategic framework. So we are saying that that framework must be guided by the principles of what we stand for, what kind of country we want to build, and what kind of government we want to put in place to respond to the challenges that communities are facing. So those principles would apply. But you're asking a question, so did you discuss what kind of compromises? I think I have said to you, there are things we will not accept. We will not go into coalition because we just want to be in power, and then we just say we will, it's smelling here, but we will close our nose and just go into coalition. No, we're not going to do that. The framework, and I think there's your colleague who asked a question on the framework on the coalition. I think it's Zianda. Zianda asked a very specific question about the framework. There were discussions before. I also know in Gauteng we even developed a framework. Even the National Executive Committee established a committee that was dealing with these issues. But we come from a national conference. So the things that were there, the new National Executive Committee is going to put in place a more robust framework that's not about trying to put together a coalition for the sake of it. We're not going to allow those things to happen. That's desperation, just trying to be in government because we must retain the privileges of being in power. So this conference is absolutely clear. And the second question you are raising, it's whether you say things have changed. Are you preparing for? In fact, our position is much more hardline, if you hear me clearly. It's much more hardline. And this conference said the first thing, we want to win elections. We want to be in government through a decisive mandate from the population. The conference was very skeptical about just talking about coalitions as if coalitions is what our goal is. And we say our goal is not to be in government. Our goal is to create a particular type of society. But we need the instruments of government. You can't do that when you are in opposition. You cannot create a fundamentally different society by sitting in opposition. All you can do there is to hold the government of the day accountable. We have been studying that from our progressive friends across the world, they have said again and again and again, when you are in opposition, you cannot assert an agenda. All you will do is to sit in parliament, yes, and then criticize the government of the day. But you are not going to pass a budget. You are not going to bring about development in education. You're not going to bring reforms. So there's nothing really glorious about being in opposition. You accept it because the population has said to you, you are not good enough. Or we trusted you, but you are not worthy of our trust, Mzwai. So that happens, but we are not working to be in coalition. We are working for victory. This conference made that point extremely clear. And because it is only victory, even if it's 50, like we heard in Gauteng, even if it's 50% plus one, where you can set up a government and be able to do things. We have had situations where we had very small margins of majority, but we were able to do certain things pretty decisively on those. So I think that clarifies that the position the president articulated has not changed. In fact, it is much more. Conference has reinforced it and said we can't have ANC members going around just wanting to set up coalitions. And that framework that was discussed previously is going to be now based on this strategic posture much more clearly. Debu, well, I just want to say to you that, look, I agree with you. Those who say things were better under apartheid are those who had the benefit of privileges under apartheid. You know, I don't think that is, all we can say is that for the overwhelming majority, things were not good under apartheid. And for the overwhelming majority, who still have many problems we cited in this, there are certain things that are, life has improved. Even those who are unemployed, having problems, many of them have access to housing. Yes, you're talking about public education and public health. The expansion of access to public education is a major. People have a choice in a democracy where to educate their children. But all we need, where to go for health, all we need is a good public health care system, good public education. The public side of things must work. Because if it doesn't, those who can afford to only go to the private would always be a small section. The middle class in our country, the black middle class in particular, a lot of them prefer to use, but we strive to improve the public health system. We strive to improve the public education system. We put lots of resources in there so that it works for everybody. People must have choices. And I must tell you, there are public schools that are really, really good. And many of you would know. There are suburban public schools that when you look, it's a public school. When you look at it, and when you must see it when the parents apply for that open period. For public schools, you must see it. Primary schools and high schools. You see the crowding. Wouldn't it be a good thing that all the public schools function at that level so that the level of confidence on them is higher? It's not a problem that poor people. These things are meant for public services are meant for people who many don't have a choice. They don't have a choice to go to another place. So that's why we need them to function. But you can't stop the people who can afford. We can't live in a democracy where you ban people from making choices. That's not a democracy. That's a quasi-democracy. You can't ban people from exercising, using their own money to go and access others. But you need good public services. That's an obligation, a developmental obligation mandated by our constitution. So that, I think, is an important qualifier. Let's get back. Ziyanda, I think I answered your question respectfully, in great detail. The ANC has dropped the ball, so you know that. You know that we accept that we dropped the ball. You know that we accept that the reason we have lost substantial support is because what the people in the commissions, the plenary session was saying, what we call the motive forces, the conditions of the majority, including working class people, in many respects, the gains I have referred to, many still have to taste a better life. Even if we have expanded access to housing, access to infrastructure in certain areas, some of those areas we now, like the energy crisis, people who had access, who never had electricity, after 1994, in villages as far as Limpopo, my mother, when she first got access to electricity, she said, it's Nelson Mandela who brought electricity to me. But if later they can't have access to electricity because ESCOM is dysfunctional, they will be unforgiving to the ANC. We understand that. That's why we must fix the problems. Putting in place basic infrastructure, and later that infrastructure cannot be maintained. People have had access to certain things as a result of democracy. And later those things, not as a result of the apartheid state, as a result of democracy. When later we fail to get those things functioning, and their lives goes back, they have every right to blame us. And we accept the blame. Is there agency for the NEC to fix these things? This NEC elected here, it's very dynamic. A combination of different generations. There's lots of impatience, even in that NEC, that we've got to fix these things, all the things we have referred to. We've got to transform our economy. We've got to deal with racism and gender-based violence decisively. We've got to get the state to function. There's a lot of impatience amongst that NEC. And the mandate from conference is that we elected an NEC that must help us move. We can't keep talking about radical socioeconomic transformation or fundamental change. We need to see that the signpost of that, we get in there. Are these resolutions or they are just views? They are now, what I presented to you is a conference resolution on strategy and tactics. But I still have to clean it up. All the things people have raised, I spoke to them here, and it will be released. Gender-based violence, there's a discussion on gender-based violence that was very, very serious, coming out of a report of one commission, very serious. I am convinced that the ANC takes gender-based violence and femicide very, very seriously. And the resolutions of a conference will be pretty clear on what to do, including amongst ANC members. Very, very clear that we don't want, and we must act very firmly. I don't want to talk about a specific individual, specific instance, but I know that this conference is absolutely serious about dealing with that as much as we're serious about dealing with racism. Which policies need to be changed? Mtabi wants you want a bit of meat into this. Unfortunately, the strategy and tactics is the skeleton, is the strategic framework that you put the meat into. Is what holds the body, and you put meat in there. You put other things. The meat is being put now, but the framework, which direction to go, where you can't go, that detail of which specific policies is what is going to come out of the specific social policy, economic policy, international relations policy, peace and stability. All those are specific policy areas where the meat will come from. But we have set the framework. This conference has set the framework on these issues. I think that really, colleagues, it seems to me that we have answered all your questions. And thank you very much for the sessions. The ANC comes out of this conference very reinvigorated, very reinvigorated. The level of confidence that we will confront these issues, that level of confidence is there. But we depend on the people of South Africa. And we want to win back their confidence. And we will not win back their confidence if we don't deal with their socio-economic conditions, if we don't deal with issues of basic security, if we don't deal with basic services, if we don't deal with access to economic opportunities, but also if we don't deal with corruption. We have to combine all those issues, deal with them comprehensively, all of them. We will win their confidence. So that's what we are confident about. Thank you so much.
No, thank you very much, Comrade Makura. Steve, we'll get the next commission if they are ready. We break. Okay, let's have a small body break. I've asked them to bring the food so that you can at least. So we are providing food for them here, so they don't have challenges.
Thank you so much.
Okay. No, thanks.
May I
Thanks,
give
Makura.
you your pen, ma'am?
Sure.